In this video, I'm gonna do a complete breakdown on how I shoot a solo short film and on how I color graded it in DaVinci Resolve. About 4 months ago, I bought a motorized slider to add some cool movement to my shots. I have to say that it was very easy and fun to use, achieving smooth both side to side and pushing shots. I put the link in the description below. I was really excited about this slider and I wanted to test it and make a video to share with you. So to do that, I decided to shoot a 2-minute solo short film. If you want to watch it, I link the short in the description. I filmed the video in a single night, so I tried to make things easy by creating a simple story set in only 2 scenes. For the scene at the table, a ski light to illuminate my character, I used one of the lights present above the table, disassembling the other 2. To light the background, I used the Godox ML60, set to 3200 degrees Kelvin to match the color temperature of the practical stand lamp in the background. I had to control the light coming from the Godox so that it illuminated only the wall and not the spot where the other me was going to appear, so leaving the character in the shadow and seeing only his silhouette against the wall. For the exterior that is seen through the window door and the projection of the stripes on the wall, I used a Godox 200D at 5600 degree Kelvin. Regarding the use of the slider, I used it in almost all the scenes. Before each shot I did quite a few tests to define the movement of the camera and the focus point, using a collapsible gray disc fixed on a monopod to simulate my position. The slider allows the camera to repeat the same identical movement many times. So, for the scene where I and the other me are, I did 2 takes repeating the same movement of the camera, and then I put the 2 takes together in post. In the second scene for my arrival in the kitchen, to illuminate the background, I used the Godox 200D, passing the light through the branches of a plant to add some texture to the background wall. For the rim light, I took advantage of the practical lamp on the console table and a pocket RGB LED smoothed by a diffuser disc. And for my low-key light, I used a LED tube smoothed by a diffuser disc. For the interior of the kitchen, I decided to have things very simple because of the lack of time, and the only thing I did, it was bouncing the light of the Godox ML60 on the ceiling. I filmed the short with the Canon EOS M and crop mode, using a 7 Artisans 25mm lens with a 1/4 Black Promised filter. I filmed in 4:2K 16:9 aspect ratio, 14-bit, and then I cropped the image in post. This is our image, shot in anamorphic mode, 1376 by 2322, 16:9 aspect ratio. To normalize it, the first thing we have to do is make sure that in our project the timeline resolution has the same aspect ratio of 16:9. Then, in our video tab, under Retime and Scaling, in Scaling select Stretch. And voila! Our image now has the correct aspect ratio. I filmed in 16:9 aspect ratio, but because I wanted that vintage look of 70s TV horror movies, I cropped the image 4/3. I prepared my nodes tree so we can go faster. I imported the footage in DaVinci as Cinema DNG, and I set the project using as Workspace DaVinci Intermediate and as Output Color Space Rec 709A because I use a Mac. I set my general look using 3 nodes to move from my input color space to DaVinci Intermediate working space, from DaVinci to Cineon, and finally I applied the Fujifilm LOT included in DaVinci. In my exposure node, I'm gonna raise my global exposure using the HDR wheels. In my contrast node, I'm gonna raise the contrast in my primaries and lower the shadows in my log. Then, in my HDR, I'm gonna push the global wheel towards cyan and the highlights toward a yellow tone. I created two serial nodes for my subtractive saturation parallel to the main branch. I changed the color space of the first node to HSV, enabling only the saturation channel and disabling the other two channels. I did the same in the second node, but this time changing the color space to HSL. Then, in the HSV node, I rose the gain in my primaries up to 2. And in the HSL node, I lowered the gain to 0.5. I added some change in my exposure node in order to wash out a little bit the blacks, rising the exposure of the blacks in my HDR, and balance it, lowering a little bit the darks. Then I qualified the skin tone with the HSL qualifier. I did that because I wanted to lower the saturation of the skin. In my primaries, I lowered the saturation of the skin to 35. Then, in my HDR wheels, I pushed the shadows toward a green tone. So, I created a power window to highlight the subject and dark its surroundings. In my first node, I add a little noise reduction to clean the image before to add organic grain. In my last node, I added some film grain, targeting the middle tones and reducing its amount in the highlights and shadows. Finally, I added some blur to add more texture to the image.